Welcome to Social Work In. In today's lecture video, we'll look into the remarkable life and contributions of Jane Addams, a pioneer in the field of social work. We'll explore her early years, her education, and most importantly, her profound impact on social work education. Join us as we uncover the inspiring journey of Jane Addams and learn how her legacy continues to shape the landscape of social work today. Jane Addams was an activist who worked for peace and helped start settlement houses in America. Settlement houses were places where people lived to provide services and support for poor communities. Jane was one of the first women of her generation to get a college education. Instead of getting married and having children, she chose to commit her life to helping the poor and working for social reforms to improve society. In England, some reformers had started living in poor slum neighborhoods to be closer to the people they wanted to help. Jane was inspired by these English reformers. In 1889, she and her college friend Ellen Starr moved into an old mansion in a neighborhood of Chicago where many poor immigrants lived. Jane's house, called Hull House, became her home for the rest of her life. It was the center of an experiment to use philanthropy, charity work, political activism, and social science research to improve conditions for the poor in Chicago. At Hull House, Jane provided educational services, housing assistance, and community centers to support the impoverished immigrant families living nearby. She also advocated for many progressive reforms through activism and legislation. Let's talk about early life and education. Jane Addams was born on September 6, 1860 in Cedarville, Illinois. She was the 8th out of 9 children in her family. When she was born, Jane had a curved spine which made it difficult for her to grow and move around as a young child. But she had an operation later that fixed her spine issue. Jane's father, John Huey Addams, was a miller, someone who operates a mill to grind grain. But he was also friends with Abraham Lincoln and had served in the Civil War. He stayed involved in politics after the war. Jane was an excellent student. When she was 17 years old in 1881, she graduated at the very top of her class, as valedictorian, from Rockford Female Seminary. The next year, the seminary changed its name to Rockford College for Women, and Jane officially received her bachelor's degree then. Jane had wanted to study medicine, but she had to stop because of health problems. It wasn't until she took a trip to Europe at age 27 with her friend Ellen Starr that she discovered her true calling. On that trip, Jane visited a settlement house, which inspired her to create her own settlement home for the poor when she returned to Chicago. Jane Addams and her friend started Hull House. In 1889, Jane Addams and her friend Ellen Starr rented an old house in Chicago that belonged to a man named Charles Hull. The two women moved into this house and began working to create a place called Hull House. Their mission for Hull House was to be a center that improves community and social life, to start educational programs and charity efforts, and to study and improve conditions in the industrial areas of Chicago. To serve the needs of the neighborhood, Addams set up many services at Hull House. This included a nursery for childcare, a dispensary to get medicines, a kindergarten, a playground, a gymnasium, and housing for young working women. Hull House was an experiment in group living. It attracted both men and women who were reformers, meaning they wanted to create positive changes in society through their service. Jane Addams always said that she learned just as much from the people living in the neighborhood as she taught them. The residents educated her about their lives and needs. Jane Addams gets involved in politics. Jane quickly realized that to truly help the poor neighborhood around Hull House, laws needed to change in the city and state. She challenged the powerful political bosses who didn't care about helping immigrants and the poor. In 1905, Jane was appointed to the Chicago Board of Education. She also helped start the Chicago School of Civics and Philanthropy. Later, she became the first female president of the National Conference of Charities and Corrections. Jane and the residents of Hull House worked to pass new laws. These included ending child labor, creating juvenile courts for young offenders, limiting work hours for women, allowing labor unions, requiring school attendance, and making factories safer. In 1912, the Progressive Party included many of these reforms in their political platform. At their convention, Jane nominated Theodore Roosevelt for president and campaigned for him. She supported women's right to vote because she felt women's votes could help pass laws to improve society. Jane spread the word about Hull House and the causes she cared about through public lectures and writing books. In her autobiography 20 Years at Hull House in 1910, she said society should respect immigrant values but also help newcomers adapt to American ways. She felt a new ethics code was needed to reduce conflict in industrial cities. Though open-minded, Jane believed in Christian morals and that hands-on learning through action was virtuous. Jane Addams against World War I. Jane Addams opposed the United States joining World War I. She believed war prevented social reforms, led to oppression of citizens, and only benefited weapons manufacturers, not regular people. Jane tried to convince President Woodrow Wilson to hold a peace conference to negotiate an end to the war, but she was unsuccessful. While the war was happening, Jane traveled around America urging people to grow more food to help the starving populations in Europe. After the war ended with an armistice, temporary peace, Jane co-founded the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom organization in 1919. She served as the president of this peace group until her death in 1935. During World War I, many people criticized and vilified, severely insulted, Jane for opposing America's involvement in the war. But a decade later, she had become a nationally admired hero and respected leader in Chicago. In 1931, Jane's lifelong work promoting peace around the world was honored when she received the Nobel Peace Prize. Jane Addams and social work. Jane Addams made groundbreaking contributions to social work education. She co-founded the pioneering Hull House settlement, which provided services and training for social workers. Addams emphasized social reform, understanding societal conditions affecting communities, and hands-on fieldwork experience. She advocated for establishing formal social work education programs, helping launch one of the first at the University of Chicago in 1908. Addams also promoted women's rights and roles in the profession. Her work at Hull House, along with her advocacy for social justice and practical training, laid the foundation for modern social work pedagogy. Jane Addams' death. In 1926, Jane suffered a heart attack and remained in poor health for the rest of her life. She died of cancer on May 21, 1935, at the age of 74. Thousands attended Jane's funeral, which was held in the courtyard of her beloved Hull House in Chicago. She was buried in her family's cemetery plot back in her hometown of Cedarville, Illinois. Thank you for watching our lecture video on Jane Addams and her impact on social work education.